In this, the very first episode of my podcast, I thought that I would begin by sharing a little bit of information about myself. My name is Chris and I teach English. I come from a fairly large town called Huddersfield in Yorkshire, in England. People often comment that I don't really sound like I'm from the north, and that's fair. My parents are not actually from Yorkshire. They're both from the south of England. And besides that, I travelled around England, France and Australia, and I picked up some different habits along the way. I also did my teacher training, which taught me to speak clearly and to enunciate my words. This means to speak each sound in the word very clearly and to leave enough pauses in my speech that people can keep up with me. Sometimes people comment that my accent is a little bit like received pronunciation, and some people have even called it posh at times, and that's okay. Some of my vowel sounds are still northern though. I say bath and not bath. I now live in Japan and I have learned Japanese in the 8 years that I've been here so far. That has had a great influence on my accent as well. I'm sure being married to a Japanese woman and obviously wanting to be understood, that had a big influence on my accent too. I've also learned to speak a little bit of French, and as I mentioned before, I travelled in France for about 6 months. Although some of the places that I stayed at were English speaking, and that was my mistake. I should have visited places where I was forced to practice my French, but we live and learn. In my live stream on Hi Native, I often get the same questions from people. These are often questions about where I come from, where I live, and things like that. I'd also like to share some thoughts about how I feel about live streaming. I never imagined myself as a streamer. Since the beginning of December in 2023, I've been streaming. It was one of those times in life where I just decided to say yes. I received an email asking if I would like to do it, and without thinking too deeply, I decided to respond yes. The feeling of waiting to press the button to go live for the first time is one I will never forget. I was nervous. I had no idea what I would talk about or whether people would be interested in listening to me talk. I had read some advice from Hi Native about how to respond to listeners, about how to make people feel welcome, and from the beginning I tried to put that into practice. The first time I streamed, I got 15 new followers. It was a real buzz. From the very first time that I did it, I felt that people were interested in hearing me talk and asking me questions about myself and my life in Japan. I made a challenge to myself to stream every day in December, and in the end, I only missed 3 days. There was one day that I had a sore throat, there was Christmas Day, and the 29th of December, which for some reason was a day that I just didn't feel like doing it. So with this being my first ever episode, I prepared a little bit of a script to begin with, and then that clip lasted 3 minutes, and I suddenly had a moment of realising, oh no, this is going to be really difficult if I try and script everything out. And so I've just had a 15-minute little think. What am I going to talk about next? And because to prepare that 3-minute little introduction took about half an hour. If it's going to take 10 minutes to make 1 minute of podcast episode, I don't think that's going to work out. So, pretty early on here, I think I'm going to have to go off-piste. And what does that mean? So off-piste comes from skiing and snowboarding, where you've got the regular slopes, the safe slopes where people can, be reasonably safe and secure. Off-piste is where nothing's been prepared, it's more dangerous. But, some people like that because it's more exciting. So here I am going off-piste for the first time, which is a bit more of the same kind of feeling as when I'm live streaming. I really pretty much don't prepare anything for the live stream. I just switch it on, I press the button, people arrive, and then I start to greet people. And we just take it from there. I answer questions. I tell some stories. I try and ask people about themselves. And it's a little bit of a difficult dynamic, I find, because I'm the only one who can speak. And everybody who's watching the live stream, they can text their comments. And they can't reply with their voice. And I can't see their face, which I do find a little bit difficult. And so I'm hoping to find a way to do live streaming where I can at least see people's face. That would be nice. It's often a challenge when I'm streaming to know what to talk about. And that is the same feeling now, which is that without having any prompt at all, I'm just sat in front of a microphone and I'm beginning to speak. So one thing that's been really fun in my live stream is to have the chance to tell some of the stories from my life and the places that I've been, the people that I've met, and the things that I've learned and seen along the way. And so that's been really enjoyable. And so I guess that I'll continue to do that here in the podcast without obviously going into all the details of my life and revealing everything like this is a therapy session or something, like a kind of psychotherapy. It's not like that, but I suppose one thing that I've struggled with is before I was streaming, I thought, who would be interested in listening to me talk? Like really, like I never imagined streaming because I thought, well, who would listen to me talk? That seems crazy. But now 6 weeks later, I find that I have some confidence that there are people out there who would like to listen to me talk and would find it quite interesting. And so here goes, I guess. I thought that one story that might be good to begin with is the story of how I met my wife and then how did I end up living in Japan, which is a fun story. And so it goes back to around 2010, I think. So I was doing my teacher training. I was learning to be a teacher for foreign students, learning English in a town in England called Cheltenham. And my wife was also there, studying English at the same college. She was on a break from university at the time. And we met in the coffee lounge there, and we started talking, and then we stayed in touch after I finished my course. We stayed in touch. I went back home to Yorkshire, and then we had a long distance relationship for about 5 years after that. So she would often, well, not often, but in fact not very often at all. I misspoke there completely. Once a year, for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, she would come to England to visit me, and we would have 2 or 3 weeks together once a year. And we did that for 5 years. And so there was a few occasions where we broke up and got back together again, and it was all very difficult. And in the end, well, I decided to ask her to marry me because I thought that it was only fair if I decide to come to Japan and to see what Japan is like, to get to know her culture. And I thought that it would be easier for us to live together if I come to Japan. So it all just came together as the right moment, really, for me. And so it was quite a culture shock, really. And that's another question that I often get in the stream is, was it a culture shock to come to Japan? And it definitely was. I remember the first day, when I got off the airplane and stepped onto Japanese soil for the first time. I met her parents. We drove back. It took about an hour to drive back to her parents' house where we were staying. And it was a huge shock. This was in the middle of summer as well, so it was very, very hot, which I wasn't used to. It's kind of like a very humid, tropical heat, and England is not like that at all. And so I stayed with her parents for about 3 months. We stayed there together, and then we found our own place. We rented a house in the same town, and I began work in her mother's tofu shop, making tofu, which is a traditional Japanese dish made of soybeans. And I stayed there for the next 8 years, working in the tofu shop. And for anybody that doesn't know, that's kind of like being a baker in England, or in an English-speaking country, or anywhere really, anywhere that bread is made. Which means you have to get up very early in the morning. So quite often I would wake up at 3 in the morning and work until about 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then come home and spend time with the family. And after 8 years, I was ready to have a change, and so I decided to start teaching English again full time, and I'm really, really glad that I did. So as you might have seen, I've just switched on the light, and you can tell that the production values is still something that I'm working on, making all my videos look as good as possible. But I think I'm going to keep all the audio that I've recorded so far. I think I'm just going to push on and just keep getting better over time is the idea. So I'm sure that every time I do this, I'll get a little bit better, a little bit more comfortable. Besides Japan and obviously France, as I mentioned before, I've also travelled in Australia. I've travelled in Indonesia as well. And those were really big adventures for me. So one reason that I'm quite excited about starting a podcast is that podcasts are one of my favourite ways to listen to things, to get information, and to hear people speak. I really like longer form discussions about things. So, a podcast that lasts maybe 2 hours or 3 hours. That's ideal for me because I like to relax with it and really spend my time thinking. And so I'm quite excited to be starting a podcast myself, although with it being the first episode, I feel very silly. I feel very silly to say that I'm starting a podcast, and I don't know if that makes sense to people. It feels kind of presumptuous, almost, to expect that people would be interested in hearing me speak. But again, I'm just repeating what I've already said, which is that I think that there are people out there that would be interested in hearing me speak. And so I'm just going to keep pushing on. And so what does presumptuous mean? I think it's a good idea when I use such a big word that people might not understand. It'd be a good idea to just explain it quickly. It comes from the word to presume. That would be the verb, to presume. And that means kind of to expect. To expect people to care is to be presumptuous, if that makes sense. Another thing I'd like to do in the podcast is to play some music as well, because I play the guitar and people often like that in the live stream. That's quite a relaxing thing to do, because sometimes after I've been talking for about an hour, my throat starts to feel very dry and I need to have a break from using my voice. So it's actually a good rest for me to play the guitar a little bit. I even sing some songs as well sometimes, and that's fun. People seem to like that. I thought it might be good to talk about some of my hobbies as well. I just had another break from recording where my mind went really blank, and I thought, oh no, what am I going to talk about next? Because I'm just talking to myself here. I'm just recording into the camera here, and not getting any feedback at all. And it's kind of a strange feeling the first time. And then I thought, well, if you talk about something that you're passionate about, that's always a good way to lose self-consciousness and begin to relax and actually enjoy the process as much as you can. And I suppose that's the same as when people are learning English. It's good to get involved in the English language with things that you're passionate about. So if somebody is passionate about their career in nursing, or it could be anything, like passionate about anime. You know, if you're passionate about anime and you're learning Japanese, that's a great way to get involved in Japanese. And so for me, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is woodworking. So I thought I'd just share a little bit of background about my experience woodworking. Actually, my dad is a builder, and when I was younger, I had the chance to work with him. I actually worked with him for a year when I was about 19, building houses and building garages and knocking things down. And I remember one time I was clearing out a garden, so just clearing out all the weeds from a garden and chopping trees down, and we were completely renovating the house. That was a fun task. That was a fun job to work on. But I only worked with him for 1 year because it wasn't my true passion. At that time, I wasn't really interested in making things with my hands. I was very interested in studying music at that time. I was extremely passionate about my music playing. And then it was later on in life when I decided to go travelling around Britain on a bicycle. And I was going to take my tent with me on the bike and just camp by the road, try to find a good place to camp, make a little fire, gather some firewood, cook some food, and get into a nice warm sleeping bag. And I had a really great time doing that. That was, in a way, that was the time of my life. It was my big adventure. And so I set off on that journey when I was about 26, I think. It's a bit hard to remember the exact dates or days or ages, or, you know, as I'm a bit older now, I'm now 37, it's all getting a little bit blurry. But I had a lot of fun, and it was in preparation for that trip that I met somebody who helped me to learn some survival skills. So like I'm saying, gathering wood, using an axe, using a knife. I learned to make a spoon from a piece of wood, you know, with a simple knife. Just making very simple things from wood that were going to be useful on my journey. And I learned that I really enjoyed working with wood. And those skills were tremendously useful on my travels. So I had a bicycle, I had 2 bags on the back, and I also had a trailer. So I was carrying a trailer on the back of the bicycle, and that was quite heavy. That was very hard work. So especially in Wales, I travelled through England and then down to Wales. And Wales, there's lots of hills, so you go up a hill and then down a hill, up a hill and down a hill. And luckily my legs felt strong, my back felt strong. I was younger then. I think if I did it now, my knees might start to hurt, but I felt very strong at that time, and I'll never forget the feeling of freedom that I had cycling down hills, especially where you don't have to pedal. That was really fun. And some moments where I got really cold unexpectedly, like with it being quite windy sometimes. I would have to stop suddenly and put an extra jumper on, or put a hat on, put my gloves on, If it started raining, I would have to stop and put my raincoat on, just make sure to stay dry, because I was just out there on my own, completely on my own. You know, on a road, obviously, so if I had an accident, I suppose somebody could help me, I hope. But I was basically on my own. Another big task that I had to do on the journey was to gather water and to clean it. So I was filtering my water. So for example, I might get water from a river and then filter it with a cotton bag, and then I would clean it with iodine, which is tastes kind of like seaweed. Seaweed is very rich in iodine. I never got sick drinking water from the wild water, so I guess it worked. And so I was staying on organic farms. I was volunteering on organic farms, learning how to plant trees, learning how to use lots of different tools, learning different skills. And I was also studying wild plants at that time. So if I saw a wild plant that I thought was interesting, I would stop and get my books out and try to identify the wild plant that I found. And I was interested in finding which plants I could eat. I learned a lot about that. And so all of that story is a way of getting back to what I was talking about before, which was woodworking. Like I mentioned, I found a love of wood carving. So I made a spoon, made some simple stuff. And then when I asked my wife to marry me, she was my girlfriend at the time, so I asked my girlfriend to marry me, hoping that she would become my wife. I actually made her a wooden ring from a tree called the hawthorn tree. It took quite a few times because it was quite a small ring, and I thought that my finger might be about the same size as her finger. So I made it, but I must have made 3 rings, and every time I tested it, I squeezed it, and the first 2 broke, and the third one was quite strong. It was around Christmas time in 2014, and I was staying with her. So I didn't mention that she came to stay in England for 1 year as a volunteer. And so I went to stay at her house over the Christmas period. And then one night we watched a movie and we had a nice meal, a glass of red wine, and I asked her to marry me. Luckily for me, she said yes. And so if we fast forward a little bit to now, I actually have a garage space. So a garage is where you normally park a car, but I don't park my car in there. I actually have a truck, and rather than parking a car in there, I actually have all my woodworking tools. So I have lots of different saws and chisels, hammers, drills, and tools like that. And I really enjoy making things like tables. And all kinds of furniture, cupboards. I like making boxes. So one of the things that I made recently was a little ring box. So the ring that I made for my wife, I finally made a box about, 9 years later. I made a box to put the ring in, and she really appreciated that. And so I'm hoping in the future to be able to do a lot more woodworking, and to have a job in the garage making things to sell, where I get to use my hands, and then to also have this job using my mind and my voice and teaching people English, helping people and supporting people to learn English. And so that's my big dream, really, is to have both of those jobs working side by side, to do them both at the same time. Besides which, I think it seems right to mention that we have 3 children, 3 lovely children here. We're very happy, and for the first episode, I think I'll leave it there for today. If you found this interesting, then definitely do all the things, do liking and subscribing, and definitely leave a comment down below. and just let me know what you think. And what would you like me to talk about next? What are you interested in hearing? I'm trying to think of lots of different ideas that I can incorporate into this podcast. And so hopefully I'll see you in the next episode. And until then, take care.